All right, I am going to do a couple on solving a basic trigonometric equation using a calculator. And just to remind you, sine is positive in quadrant 1 and 2, so it would be negative in 3 and 4. Cosine is positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 4, so it would be negative in 2 and 3. And tangent is positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 3. So when you use the calculator, it's always going to give you the answer in quadrant 1, and you have to figure out where the reference angle is depending on if you're in quadrant 2, 3, or 4 on one of the other applications. And so one of my questions here says, if the sine of theta is equal to 0.6192. So if you happen to be using the graphing calculator from the bookstore, you have to make sure that your calculator is in radians instead of degrees. It's probably right now in degrees because that's the default. And so what you would have to do is hit the mode button, which is right here, 2 times, mode, and then you'll see number 2 is radians, number 1 is degrees. So you're going to hit number 2 to change it into radian mode. I'm going to clear out my calculator there because I have stuff on there. You should see up at the top a little R instead of the little D, which means it's in degrees. So I'm going to do the inverse sine. So if I'm using this calculator, I'm going to use the second function button and then hit the sine to get the sine to the negative 1 on the top. So inverse sine of 0.6192 is equal to, and they are having us round these off to the nearest hundredth. So if I'm rounding that off to the nearest hundredth, I would have 0.67. So theta is approximately equal to 0.67 when I round off my number here, because I got 0.667. I got to round it up to 0.67. Now, since I know my other one is in quadrant 2, in quadrant 2, my reference angle always goes down to the x-axis. So that means this angle in here is 0.67, but I have to find this angle here. So I have to know that this is pi, and I'm going to take pi minus 0.67. Again, on my calculator, I do have the pi button, which is right above the EXP. So I am going to hit shift and then EXP, and it's going to put pi, and then I'm going to minus, and I could just type in 0.67, or notice you have that answer button down there. You could hit pi minus the answer. Pi minus the answer, if I take that and I round that off, I'm going to have 2.47 for my other angle, 2.47. So theta is approximately equal to 0.67 or 2.47. They tell us on here if they want us to separate that with a comma or not. Yes, it says separate them with a comma when you enter those in. Now, if you happen to use the Alex calculator, let me slide this over to my screen. On the Alex calculator, right here's the spot where you change it between degrees and radians. So if I click on it, it's in degrees. If I click on it again, it's in radians. And so I can switch it back and forth between degrees and radians. We want this in radians. Here, you're just going to use the inverse sine button. Inverse sine of 0.6192. And when I enter, there I get my number 0.67, and again I can then find my other answer by taking pi minus that since I'm doing the sine. So I'm going to bring up another question here. Go ahead and go to more practice. And this time they give me the secant. Now I have to keep in mind that the secant is the inverse of my cosine. So again, if I go over to my paper, and so it tells me that the secant of theta is equal to -5/4. I have to know that the secant is the inverse of the cosine. So in this case, the cosine of theta is going to equal -4/5 if I do my reciprocal. So when I'm doing my cosine, I have to know that my cosine is going to be negative in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. So I'm going to have this angle here and this angle here. So on my on my regular calculator, I'm going to grab my regular calculator. Again, it's in radian measures. It's got the little R up at the top. And so I am going to do shift and hit the cosine button to do inverse cosine. And in this case, I like to put my fractions in parentheses. You'll notice on the Alex calculator, they make you do parentheses anyway. So negative 4 fraction 5, close my parenthesis, and it gives me 2.498, so 2.50. 2.50. Now, I'm going to go ahead and grab the Alex calculator here before I do the next step of that, just to show you. Same thing here. If I go to the Alex calculator, again, we have to use the inverse cosine of negative 4/5. And so there's my 2.498 again. So you can just use the Alex calculator. It's probably just as easy, but if you want to use your handheld one, you can. Now back to my problem. I've only found one of my angles, and I need to find both of my angles. Oops, get back on my paper here. And so I have to know that this value here is less than pi, less than 3.14, which means it's the angle that goes from here to here, 2.50. What I'm going to do to find this other angle is I have to find out how big my reference angle inside here is. So I'm going to take the pi and subtract my 2.50 so I can figure out how big this angle inside here is. So again, I don't like to round, so I am going to use my pi button on my calculator. Pi minus my answer. So I have pi minus my answer. I hit equal. And so I know that the angle inside there is 0.64. 0.64, which means this angle in here is also 0.64. So now I want to find the angle all the way around from here to here. I'm going to take pi, I'm going to add my 0.64 because I know from here to here is pi plus that little distance in there that I have to do. So again, I am going to use the pi button on my calculator. So shift and hit the EXP key to get the pi. And I'm going to add that reference angle on there, 0.64. And so I'm going to get 3.78 for my other value. So theta is going to either equal 2.50 or 3.78. All right, I'm going to do one more here. This one is a tangent one. So on my tangent one, I know my tangent is positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 3. I have the tangent of theta equals 1.9908. And so again, on this one, I'm just going to use my inverse tangent. If I grab my regular calculator, I'm going to hit shift and then the tangent button. And so I have inverse tangent, and then I can just put in my 1.9908. And I get 1.105. 1.105 would round off to 1.11. Again, if we do it on the Alex calculator, let me slide my camcorder over here. On my Alex calculator, again, make sure it's in radians. It is in radians. I'm going to do the inverse tangent, and I'm going to put 1.9908. And when I hit equal, you can see I get the same answer as I got on my regular calculator, 1.11. Now I need to find my other angle. So again, going back to doing my work on my paper, tangent is positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 3. So I know that my reference angle in here is 1.11. I have to go to quadrant 3 with that same size angle. So in this case, I'm going here to here, which is pi, plus my angle, the 1.11. So I am going to go ahead and grab my calculator here. I'm going to do shift and hit the EXP button to get pi. I'm going to add my 1.11 this time. And so I get 4.25 for my other answer. And just one other note here. Here when I had the secant, I had to do the reciprocal. If I would have the decimal, for example, if this would have been cosecant, I would have taken 1 divided by that value, and that would give me my new value, because obviously it's probably hard to do the reciprocal of that since it's not a fraction. So you do 1 divided by this value, and then you would have the reciprocal if that had been cosecant. Same thing, if this one had been cotangent, I would have done 1 divided by the 1.9908 and used that value. Because on our calculator, we can only do the inverse sine, cosine, and tangent. If they give us the cosecant, secant, or cotangent, then we have to do the reciprocal in order to find the value.